Hi students, now that we have observed learning objective 1 and reflected, let's look at learning objective 2 and look at biographical characteristics of diversity and how they relate to organizational behavior. Okay? So, when we talk about biographical characteristics, refer to PowerPoint 2.7. Diversity is a broad term, and the phrase workplace diversity can refer to any characteristic that makes people different from one another. When we talk about biographical characteristics such as age, gender, race, disability, and length of service, these are some of the most obvious ways that people differ from one another. Now go to PowerPoint 2.8. They talk about age. Age is the relationship between, age refers to the relationship between age and job performance, and that is likely to be an issue of increasing importance during the next decade for many reasons. A, the workforce is aging, and B, there is U.S. legislation before us right now, for all intents and purposes, that are going to outlaw mandatory retirement. Used to be you had to retire by 65 or 70, and there's legislation that says we can't do that anymore. Because why? People are living longer. So the next thing is employers are expressing mixed feelings about the older worker. What is an older worker? They see a number of positive qualities that older workers bring to their jobs, such as experience, judgment, a stronger work ethic, and commitment to quality. We have Nexers, we have millennials, we have baby boomers, like all under one roof. How do managers work with that type of diversity right now when it comes to age? But the thing is about older workers, they are perceived as, again, stereotyping, lacking flexibility and resisting new technology. And that isn't true. I'm not resisting new technology. So what effect does age actually have on turnover, absenteeism, productivity, and even job satisfaction? And we have to ask ourselves those questions. So the older you get, the less likely you are to quit your job, because really, sometimes you've been in a job for so long, you don't want to leave, you're in a comfort zone. In general, older employees have lower rates of avoidable absence than do younger employees. However, they have equal rates of unavoidable absence due to sickness and because they're older. So, reviews of the research find that age and job task performance are really unrelated, and that older workers are more likely to engage in citizenship behavior, which means nothing more than they are loyal. So the evidence is mixed regarding age and job satisfaction. Satisfaction tends to continually increase among professionals as they age, whereas it falls among non-professionals during middle age, so like somewhere between 45 and say 55, and then they rise again in later years. So combating age discrimination may be associated with higher levels of organizational performance. Jump to PowerPoint 2.9. They talk about sex. Few issues initiate more debates, misconceptions, and unsupported opinions than whether women perform as well on jobs as men do. And there's been a lot of disparity in how that's looked at. So the best place to begin to consider this is with the recognition that few, if any, important differences between men and women affect job performance. Surveys show that there is no consistent male-female differences in problem-solving ability, analytical skills, competitive drive, motivation, sociability, learning ability, or any of those things. But unfortunately, gender roles still affect our perceptions because we're stereotyping. Once in the job, men and women may be offered a similar number of developmental exercises, but females are less likely to be assigned challenging positions by men, assignments that may help them achieve higher organizational positions, which has historically been true in the past 50 years. Women who succeed in traditionally male domains are perceived as less likable, more hostile, and less desirable as supervisors. And certainly, this is very much stereotyping, and for the most part, not true. Women still earn less money than men for the same positions, even for traditionally female positions. Working mothers also face maternal bias. They refer to that actually as maternal wall bias by employers, meaning that they often are not considered for new positions after they have children, and both men and women face discrimination for their family caregiving roles. Research has also shown that workers who experience the worst form of overt discrimination, sexual harassment, have higher levels of psychological stress, and that these feelings in turn are related to lower levels of organizational commitment and job satisfaction, and higher intentions to leave the organization. Most of this is stereotyping and not true. Research continues to underline that although the reasons for employee turnover are complex, sex discrimination is detrimental to the organization and performance, particularly for intellectual positions for managerial employees in the United States and in small to medium-sized firms. So again, it is worth asking what the implications of sex discrimination are for individuals. The evidence suggests that combating sex discrimination may be associated with better performance for the organization as a whole. So, when you look at race and ethnicity, race is a very controversial issue. We define race as the biological heritage people use to identify themselves. Ethnicity is the additional set of cultural characteristics that often overlap with race. So if you go to your PowerPoint 2.10, look at that. Most people in the United States identify themselves according to their racial groups. The U.S. Bureau of Census classifies individuals according to 7 broad racial categories. Starts with American Indian and Alaskan, Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and some other race, white, and 2 or more other races. And ethnicity distinction is also made between native English speakers and Hispanics. Hispanics can be of any race. Race and ethnicity have been studied as they relate to employment outcomes, such as hiring decisions, performance evaluations, pay, and workplace discrimination. Okay, so let's sum up a few points here. A, in employment settings, individuals tend to slightly favor colleagues of their own race in performance evaluations, promotion decisions, and pay raises. Although such differences are not really found to be consistently true, they still weigh in, especially when highly structured methods of decision making are put into place. The other thing is there is a substantial racial difference that exists in attitude toward affirmative action, with African Americans approving of such programs to a greater degree than whites. African Americans generally fare worse than whites in employment decisions. Employers' major concerns about using mental ability tests for selection, promotion, training, and similar employment decisions is that these tests may have an unnecessary negative impact on racial and ethnic groups. So, when you think about it, discriminating against employees when they're qualified because they belong to certain groups of people is really kind of crazy, ludicrous, if you will. But it still goes on. We still do this. And we ask ourselves the question, does racial and ethnic discrimination lead to negative workplace outcomes? Absolutely. But the evidence isn't entirely clear. There's considerable evidence that suggests that diversity tends to interfere with group cohesion, groups coming together, and decision making, at least in the early stages of group formation. On the other hand, some research suggests that having a positive climate for diversity overall can lead to increased sales. Evidence also suggests that some people find interacting with other racial groups uncomfortable unless there are clear behavioral scripts that guide their behavior, stereotyping on a template, even in the interview process. So creating diverse work groups focused on mutual goals could prove to be very helpful, along with developing a positive diversity climate. So I want to kind of reflect a little bit and stop here with the two objectives that we just kind of talked about, and that is identifying the key biographical characteristics, objective number 2, as they are relevant to OB. And what do we mean by intellectual ability? And I think we have to take that very seriously. Okay? So I'm going to kind of get back to where you were when we talk about physical disabilities of the job, and we also talk about what we mean when we say disability. So go to PowerPoint 2.11. Let's talk about disability a little bit. With the passage of the ADA, or the Americans Disability Act, in 1990, representation of individuals with disabilities in the U.S. workforce rapidly increased. Making inferences about the relationship between disability and employment outcomes is difficult. Why? The term disability is so broad. What do we mean by disability? Okay? So one of the most controversial aspects of the ADA is that the provisions that require employers to make reasonable accommodations for people with psychiatric disabilities, as opposed to physical disabilities, is very difficult. The impact of disabilities on employment outcome has been explored from a variety of perspectives. On one hand, the review of the evidence suggests that workers with disabilities receive higher performance evaluations, whether or not the evaluations would be considered to be somewhat objective. In other words, having a disability or not. The same review found that despite these higher performance ratings, individuals with disabilities tend to encounter lower performance expectations and are less likely to be hired. Go figure. Negative employment situations are prevalent for individuals with mental disabilities, and there is some evidence to suggest mental disabilities may impair performance much more than physical disabilities. In summation, the treatment of the disabled workforce has been very problematic, whether it be physical and or psychological. We have made a lot of advancements in this area, but a lot of disabilities, whether physical or mental, really sometimes point to some discrimination because people are viewed as being different, we stereotype them, we put a label on them. In addition, with continuing technology and workplace advancements, we have greatly increased the scope of available jobs for those with all types of disabilities. So this is going to be the end of this particular video, which takes in, I believe, hold on one second, just going through my notes here, which takes in, I believe, okay, everything up to through number 2. So objective number 2. So the next thing we want to do is define intellectual ability, objective number 3. I want you to review and reflect this video on objective 2. It's pretty large. And then move on to video number 3, which is going to be objectives 3 and 4, which is defining intellectual ability and its relevance to OB, and contrasting intellectual and physical ability.